Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Let's Be Bold. We are almost done with our series on rest. Today I'm going to be talking to you guys about spiritual rest. So, spiritual rest is something that I don't feel like innately people talk about. And today I'm going to define it as engaging in the holy places and spaces. Now, if you are somebody who's watching and you're not a religious person or a person of faith, there are still ways to engage in spiritual rest outside of the religious spaces. So this is specifically about the way that we connect to ourselves, the way that we connect to other people, the way that we connect to our environment. So talking about connection, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about 4 different types of connection. And the first one is connecting to God. So if you are a person of faith, you are a religious person, then finding those spaces where you connect to God can look very differently for different people. For me, it might look like engaging in prayer. I engage with God on walks or on hikes. It could be spending some time in meditation. It could be journaling, and it could be hanging out in your spiritual community, whatever that looks like for you. Now, meditation is something that I know people engage in outside of religious spaces as well. But regardless of the context in which you engage in meditation, slowing down your mind, spending some time sitting still and dwelling in a place that brings you energy, brings you a place of connection to whatever is greater, something that is bigger than you. That is something that I would recommend that you try if that's something that you haven't tried yet. The second point of connection is people. And last week when I was talking about social rest, I was talking about recognizing the ways that you are either like gain energy from people or are drained from people. And engaging in spiritual rest, connecting with people for me is a very spiritual place as well, especially if I am in a humble position, especially if I'm in a place of serving others. And so yes, that looks like co-leading in my city group at church, but that also looks like meeting people here in this space. This is we're in my office this week. And when people come into this space and they share their stories and they are vulnerable with me about the things that they've gone on, that they have going on in life, or things that they have experienced in the past, when they become very emotionally expressive, whether that's through tears, whether that's through frustration, whether that's through confusion, that feels like a spiritual resting place to me, to be able to serve and connect with people's stories and recognize that not everyone has the ability to share these parts of themselves with people that are in their everyday life. So that is just one small example. Another way that this can look is connecting in nature. Earlier I said that hiking and going on walks is a place of connection for me. I love hiking mountains, and it's really interesting, at least for me, that when I spend time walking up mountains, especially 14ers, those longer hikes that I like to go on, I find myself ruminating on scripture, thinking about hymns that I grew up with, new hymns that I've been introduced to since being away from home. And it's also interesting because I find myself doing some sermon writing. I don't even preach that many sermons, but I find myself being able to reflect and engage in theology and recognizing the world that God created and being out in nature, boots on the ground, touching. I'm a big touching of like plants and trees that are around. Not so much animals. I let them be. I don't want to get bit by nothing. I'm not here for all of that. But as far as plants go, being able to just like touch and feel the earth creates a sense of spiritual connection and spiritual rest for me. And bonus about hiking in mountains is there's no cell phone connection until once you get to 14,000 feet at the top. There might be, but for the most part, it's just you on the ground in nature, and then like the people that you are hiking with, which I recommend you go with people. And then finally, Ancestry. Ancestry is another way that people connect to, like, in the spiritual way, right? So the concept of, in the reality of that, there are people that have gone before you, people in your lineage that share DNA with you, that have set a foundation likely of how you live and how your like family interacts with each other. So sometimes this looks like recognizing what the spiritual blessings are in your family. Sometimes it looks like recognizing what the spiritual curses are in your families. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that at this time. So those are the 4 ways of connection. And then ultimately, this is where engaging spiritual rest is how we find rest for our souls. So some additional examples to ones that I've already named: singing. Singing is something that I do a lot. If anyone knows me, they know that I will bust out in a song in a heartbeat. We could be mid-conversation. You could be in front of me on a hike and you'll probably hear some song float up to your ears. But singing for me, I have found, is a way to just connect with my own self, connect with how I am feeling, to like move through things depending on the vibe. Depending on the vibe, whether that's engaging in a slower paced song, whether that's engaging in a hymn, whether that's engaging in a more upbeat song. It is a tangible way that I can connect with myself and then also like soothe myself as well. I have found that in times where I am like in high places of stress or things like that, I'm really overwhelmed, I will stop singing. So actually it's really interesting because my voice might shut down altogether and I feel like, okay, I either don't have much to say or whatever I do have to say, I can't communicate. And so like, my friends closest to me know that that's like a warning sign. They're like, what's happening? You're too quiet. And then it like takes a lot of work for me to like activate my voice. And I think that is something, like when I recognize, okay, I think that I'm in a particular spiritual battle or I'm under attack at the moment, it has a lot to do with my voice for me. I can't speak for other people. That's just what it looks like for me. We already talked about prayer and meditation, which are some other ways that you can find rest for your soul. Additionally, engaging in community groups, even if this is not a group connected to a church, just engaging in community in general and having that shared space of like, this is what's going on in my life, this is what's going on in your life, this is what's going on in the world, and being able to work through it together or create a plan of action together or encourage or hype each other up can also be spiritual rest. Again, we talked a little bit about this with social rest, and this is also a place of spiritual rest too, that like deep sense of connecting to a community that is outside of ourselves. Journaling is a great way for spiritual rest. I, at one point in my own spiritual journey, I used to write my prayers down, and it would take me so long. I mean, it'd be like 30, 40, 45 minutes of me just going through things, and all of the things in my life would come floating to me because I spent time intentionally writing through them, and they were almost like letters to God, which for me was a different intimate space of communicating with God than just, speaking in prayer. So, journaling through what's going on in your life, your strengths, your needs, is another way to find rest for your soul. And then crying. I believe crying is a sign of healing. It can be a sign of stress as well. But it signals to people around you like this person has a need. And if you're a person who is vulnerable enough to be willing to cry in the presence of other people, that is a place that represents like our spirit moving towards this connection that we need, or our spirit letting go of things that we've been holding on to for a really long time, or our spirit being really angry. I'm like an angry crier. Like I'm thinking about times where I was growing up, and if I was crying about something, I was probably angry about something. So it could be a sign of like anger in that way. And so I think it represents, again, things moving through our spirits, things moving through our bodies, and then we get that release or that rest in that way. So here is my challenge to you guys this week. I want you to spend at least 30 minutes engaging in this space. It'd be great if it was 30 minutes a day. I know that not everyone is in a space to where they're ready to engage in some sort of spiritual rest 30 minutes a day. So I just encourage you to engage in whether it's one of the things that I named here today, or whether it's another way that you recognize that you engage in those spiritual places. I want you to spend 30 minutes this week spending time in engaging in spiritual rest. And I will see you next week.